So this is a story about two Jewish men in a sauna. Paul Stein and I have known each other, I'm 65, we've known each other since we were 12, so call it 53 years. About 10 years ago, I was at York Rackets in a sauna. I said, Paul, you're a very high-profile attorney. I call them attorneys. You're a high-profile lawyer. You do all this M&A activity, and you've never brought me a deal. So I said, why? I mean, we see each other in the sauna all the time. I don't think I offend you. You don't offend me. There's got to be some kind of opportunity. So he says, I actually got some guy for you to meet. He's an amazing guy. So I met Wes. We were at 45 Hazelton Avenue in the boardroom. We call it boardroom, I guess it was our dining room. And he had me at hello. And I fell in love.
Hold on. You're going to finish the story, but I'm going to tell you a part of my version of the story.
Okay.
So by the way, two Jewish guys in a sauna talking about a black guy. That's a first, okay? So Paul finished up, and Paul called me up and said, "You got to meet this guy, Miles. You got to meet him." And Paul set up the meeting, and we went to your offices, as you mentioned, and he's like, "Okay, talk to me about your business." And I'm talking to him. And he was focusing on like everything else other than me, than what I'm talking about. What I didn't know was that he was listening to me, right? And he was like picking up the phone and he's booking appointments. And he said, no, keep talking. I mean, after the conversation was over, I went back with Paul. I said, Paul, what's going on with this guy? Does he have ADD? What's happening? Paul's like, that's Miles. Miles, I got back into the office, and as soon as I walked into my office, the phone rang, and it was him. And we had this great conversation. I'm going to tell the rest of the story because you'll tell your part. And we had this amazing conversation, right? And Miles said to me, I'm going to be in Antigua. Why don't you come down and spend some time with me? And we talked a little bit. And we spent a day down there together, and it was the most amazing experience. And he gave me a handshake deal, and then 2 months later, we signed on that handshake deal. And he's been my friend. He's been my, just this rock the whole time. And everything he said he was going to do when he acquired the majority stake in Kingsdale, he did. And it was, just a great relationship that started back in, when was that? 2013 or something like that?
Yeah, probably 10
back
years
then,
ago.
yeah.
So the reason for the trip, I have these principles of partnership. And one of my principles of partnership is never partner with people you're not prepared to have a long weekend in a small cabin, small boat, small ranch, or small RV. So I said, look, if we're going to be partners, we got to sort of sleep together. Like we got to live together. We got to be around together. And we had the most remarkable time. And it became very apparent to me that Wes was extraordinary. And I said, look, I can help you build your business, but you have to help me look like you. I said, I never saw anybody so elegant, sophisticated, and well-dressed. And so I've been taking life lessons from him, and 10 years later, I'm 75 pounds lighter, and I'm not as good looking as he is, but I'm almost as dapper. But, I think Wes's story is really a remarkable one for everybody that's here. I'm sure you know it. And I feel very privileged, not only by our professional relationship, we were his partner in Westdale, but by our friendship. And I've had the good fortune of knowing his family, and his children, and his lovely wife. And I've watched how he has navigated from bare feet to now at the pinnacle of Bay Street. And it's something that I am very proud of, and I know that there is a huge following that you have. So we're going to go back from the beginning. You came to Canada in 1985. You talk about in your book that you went through a lot of hardship, and that you had an abusive upbringing to some degree, but your grandmother was a remarkable role model for you and took you under her wing. You started off in the mailroom at Stikeman Elliott, and you worked your way forward. Talk about what Toronto was like in 1985, call it 38 years ago. Talk about the experiences that you had early on, and some of the evolution of how you became Wes Hall 2023.
Yeah, so I came September 27th, 1985, was a Friday. And I remember getting off the plane at Pearson Airport, and my dad was there with my siblings and my stepmother, and I came out, you come out the international, and the doors open, and all these people are there, and I see a sign, because I had never really met my family. I met my dad a few times, but I wouldn't recognize him. I couldn't pick him out of the crowd. And so they had signs, and I went over, and they introduced me to everybody, and they put me in this car, they call it Betsy. It's this big car. And they drive in me on the 401, and I've never seen anything like it. Never seen highways that big and cars going that fast. And they took me to Malvern. Malvern was a tough neighborhood at the time in Scarborough. And it was a subdivision that was, there was like about 3 houses or 4 houses in it. It was dusty when it's hot, muddy when it's raining. And that's where we lived. And they brought me to this house, and it was amazing. It's like, I saw success. I'm like, this is success, because my dad was a factory worker, my stepmom was a factory worker, but they had a house, they had these great kids, and that's what I wanted. And so Monday, they brought me to Pearson, Leslie Pearson, and they enrolled me in school, went to a guidance counselor. A week later, I went back to my dad and said, school is easy here in Canada. And he's like, what do you mean? Nobody knew how to speak English in my class. And because they put me in the ESL program. Because I'm talking like this in American school, nobody understands. So they're like, this kid can't speak English, put him in the ESL program, which I probably would have done too. And that's what happened. And so my dad said, no, and by the way, I came from an English-speaking country, and English is my only language, okay? It's just that I speak it with a dialect at the time. And so when I went back, my dad went back and said, no, you gotta take him, he needs to be in the regular program. And at the time they had 3 streams, basic, general, and advanced. And they put me in the basic program. Now the basic program was, if you just gotta show up to school with a pulse and you graduate, right? But that degree that certificate that you get is useless. You can't go to university, you can't so it disqualifies you from all kinds of different jobs. Couldn't work on Bay Street, all that stuff. And I went back again, I told my dad, man, school is easy here in Canada. So he's like, what do you mean? I showed him the courses, he went back, turned out that was in basic, they put me in, changed the program. Turned out that I went from basic, first of all, not knowing how to speak English, to basic English, to advanced English. And then, because of him and how proactive he was, I was able to get into the right stream, because that's what they call it in Canada, a streaming. I was able to get into the right stream that allows me to get to where I'm at today ultimately.
I want to go backwards. One of the great stories that really resonated with me and had a real emotional impact was the relationship you had with your grandmother. And you told the story that you had very modest means back in Jamaica. But your grandmother would always welcome, keep her door open, and provide food for everyone in the neighborhood. But she had modest means. Tell that story, and how did that impact you and your value system in your future life?
So my sister Joan, she was 4, myself at the time 18 months old, and my brother Ian was 6 months old, and we're abandoned in a plantation shack, similar to what my grandmother had, by our mother. She just left, and she boiled a pot of porridge, and it was done, and we started crying. And a neighbor heard us crying and came over to see what was going on, only to find out that we're by ourselves. And so he said, hey, I'm gonna go get your grandmother. He went to the plantation. My grandmother was working at the time in the banana plantation, and went to get her. And she came with a trolley, loaded us up, and brought us with her. And at the time, she had 7 grandkids that she was raising. And she was 60 years old when she did that. And so my grandmother, even though she was in extreme poverty, she was always industrious. She, planted her own yams and bananas and stuff. She put it and sell it to the market. But she's known for her generosity. So when she would cook for all of us, keep in mind, there was 10 kids, grandkids, and she had a special needs adult daughter that she was raising at the time. But when she would cook, we would all be fed, and the neighborhood kids would just hang out and get fed by her as well. And she did that the entire time that I lived with her. She never said no to anyone. So that generous spirit that I saw with someone who had nothing kind of just informed the way that I behave today, especially when I have so much. You know, how could I see someone suffering and not help? And it's, you know, one of the parts that I mentioned in the book about, you know, being surrounded by so much, like sugarcane plantation, and there are times when we're hungry, we had nothing. And I remember going to the field, I was probably about 8 years old, took a sugarcane and I was eating it, and I was chased by the ranger with a gun. And I had to run to my grandmother's house under the bed because I tried to quench my appetite. And it just, you know, and that's how society is, that we have so much sometimes, but we do little to help others who have nothing. And society always celebrates those people who have so much and do nothing about it, and the people who can't help themselves and have nothing, they look down on. And so my grandmother's example helped me to not be that person who just ignore you know, problems in society, whether or not it's fighting injustice, helping the underserved, helping hunger, you know, educated, all those things that I see in society right now, I went through them in my life.
Go back 1985, you're 15 years of age?
16.
16 years of age. You're on Bay Street. There was not a lot of people from the islands on Bay Street. What was it like? What was the experience like? How did it affect you? Did you have great aspirations that you would be West Hall 2023? Or did you say, I'm going to survive and I will make my way, but I have confidence in my ability? What were you thinking?
Yeah, so when, you know, so later on when I finally got out of school and a buddy of mine called me up and said, hey, there's a job at a law firm on Bay Street that I applied for it, but I already have a job.
What year is this?
This would have been 1990, I think it was.
So you're 20 years of age.
Yeah. And so he said, hey, I already have a job. But I don't want that, he told the people that, but I know this buddy of mine who was looking for work. And that buddy was me. And then so I went, they called me up, and they hired me over the phone. It was back in the day, it's almost
This is in the mailroom.
Yeah, they just hired me. They said, hey, again, just like high school, if you have a pulse, they'll hire you, right? Like it was that situation. It was like jobs were abundant back then, right? And just like it is today, whereby people just don't show up to work. But back then, it's like they hired me over the phone, and they said, come in on Monday to fill out the application. I have not been on Bay Street before, because I'm in Malvern. You know, there's times when you're in a certain environment, and even 5 miles away is like a foreign country to you. So when you're in an underserved community, for example, people in cases have never left that community, even here in Canada, right? I remember having a situation where I bring these kids down from Jane and Finch, and they couldn't stop marveling at tall buildings because they'd never seen it. So I came downtown, and I was one of those kids that, wow, this is like, this Commerce Court West. I went in the elevator on the 13th floor, and my ears popped. And I walked out the elevator, and it's like I stepped in an episode of LA Law. It was like these fancy lawyers with fancy suit on and nice art on the wall, and I'm like, this is great. And I fill out the application. They said, okay, you start on Monday, but what I saw was all these people were in suits. And I figured, I gotta get me a suit, but I didn't have one. Okay, so I went to Goodwill, and I got myself a suit, and Monday I showed up with a suit on in the mailroom. The guys in the mailroom started laughing at me. It's like, dude, people are gonna think you're a lawyer. I'm like, what's wrong with that? But what I saw was the life that I wanted. It completely, all of a sudden, my dad's level of success wasn't success anymore. This was success. But what I didn't see, and I didn't pay attention to, was that all the folks that I was encountering, none of them looked like me. Not a single one of them. All the people that I wanted to be in the corner offices, none of them looked like me. But it didn't deter me, because when I was growing up in Jamaica, I saw people in those positions of authority that looked like me. Black police officers, chiefs of police, prime ministers, judges, lawyers, bankers, business leaders, you name them. So to me, I couldn't be one of those people, but back in the day, I couldn't, because I couldn't get educated. My grandmother couldn't afford to send me to primary school, because once you finish primary school, you have to take an exam to go to high school, and then you have to pay to go to high school. My grandmother couldn't afford that. But when I came here, education was free, and then if I get a scholarship, I could go to university. I could be whatever I want, so nobody could tell me because I was black, I couldn't do it. So even though I didn't see anyone that looked like me, I just felt that I could make it happen. I didn't know how far I was gonna go though. I didn't know.
Talk about where you lived in Toronto. You moved around a little bit, and you started off with certain family members, and then you moved.
Yeah.
You carved your own niche in life. Talk about the transitions that you made and the challenges that you had and the thought process you went through.
Well, my wife is here, Christine, and she was a big part of that. Because Christine was 19, I was 21, turning 22 years old when we got married. So shortly after that, get into the mailroom, I got married shortly thereafter. And so we lived in our first house. I remember going home and, we had to, the prostitutes would hang out on the front steps. And we had to tell them that it's time for us we gotta leave so we can get into our house. And we lived at Shooter and Sherburne Street. Right? If anybody knows Shooter and Sherburne, Moss Park, that was it was a tougher neighborhood back then. And so Christine and I lived in that apartment. We had our first son in that apartment. And shortly thereafter, we bought our first house for $112,000. We put every single dollar that we could find to come up with a down payment to buy that house. It was 1,100 square feet on Marigold Avenue in Eastern and Queen. And this was, and I couldn't afford to, hire this guy to renovate it. The guy didn't show up. I couldn't afford to hire somebody else. And I go, I gotta figure out how to renovate this house. And I started to rip walls down. And we renovated the house by myself with some friends. And so that was an initial sign that I was gonna be that guy who just get things done. Even though I didn't know how, I was gonna figure it out. And we got that house renovated. We had 3 kids in that house, sold it for double the price that we paid for it, bought a bigger house, and then kept on going and building. But the thing that I had that a lot of people didn't have was earlier on in my life, I had my grandmother. Then I went to my mom, who was extremely abusive. Then I came to Canada, lived with my dad. We didn't get along too much. 2 years into coming here, I moved out my senior year of high school, and I started to live on my own since. And I was lucky enough to meet my wife at the age that I met her. And we went through that thing together that helped me to build the confidence in myself, because I had someone who kept telling me, you can do this. And even though I was taking chance after chance and risk after risk, I still had somebody who said, you can do this.
So I'm sure lots of young people come to you and say, I want to be Wes Hall. I come from a modest beginning. I want to be a great entrepreneurial success. I want to be a role model. Go back to the beginning. First of all, explain to people what's a Kingsdale.
Yeah.
How did you start it? But what is the business? And because it's a remarkable story, considering you were involved in the deals of the day across North America. But go back to the beginning, explain what Kingsdale is.
So when, Richard Branson once said that if somebody offers you a great opportunity and you don't know how to do it, say yes and figure it out later. That has always been my motto. So I was hired. I moved up the ladder eventually, and somebody wanted to hire me as in their company. This company called Georgeson, and they did shareholder services. I had no idea what the hell they did, but that's what he said they did. And he wanted to hire me. And at the time, we're living in that 1,100 square foot house that I was renovating, and we didn't have any money. We were broke. In fact, the guy called me up, and he's telling me that he's going to hire me. Told me how much.
What year is this, sorry?
What year was that, Christine? I don't know, 2000, because I started Kingsdale in 2003. I was only there for 3 years. So it was 2000. And he called me up and he's like, hey, I want you to come work for me as Director of Business Development. I said, what do you guys do? And he explained it to me. And I go, okay, fine. If I'm gonna come, it has to be a Vice President position. Now, I didn't know what they did, and I wanted a Vice President position. So the guy said, I don't have the authority to give you that title. And I said to the guy, when you have the authority, call me. Now, Christine was on a mattress, because we couldn't afford a box spring or a headboard and everything, just a mattress. And she was laying in the bedroom on the mattress while I'm talking to this guy, turning down this opportunity and telling them that when you have the authority, call me. And I hang up the phone and she looked at me. He's like, we can't even afford a mortgage. You didn't say, I want more money. You go, I don't want that title. And I turned it down. And a week later, he called back and said, hey, I have the authority to give you what you're looking for. And I became Mr. Vice President. I joined this company, and literally, I had no idea what to do. My inbox was empty. There was no emails in my inbox. My desk was empty. And then I saw what he had, the problem that he had, because within a week of me joining, 50% of his workforce essentially just walked out because they were offended that they promoted me to be the vice president in this company. And I remember going to this guy and I said, hey, don't worry about those guys leaving. We're gonna do fine without them. Could you imagine that? I had no idea what they were doing. And I went in there with all that bravado, and the guy looked at me, and I think if he had something to just throw in my face, he would have done it. He was just like, just get the hell out of my office. Look what you just did, right? So anyways, I left, and it was the best year ever. Figured it out really quickly. And then over time, I said to them, listen, I believe that this business could change. I believe that we could offer a different level of service, more advising people on what they call proxy fights and shareholder activism. And that word didn't exist in the Canadian vocabulary when I was using it. Like, it just didn't
You gotta
exist.
just go back 1 second.
Yeah.
Explain to people what shareholder activism means. Like, you gotta make it just so that it's for regular guys like me.
I'll dumb it down, yeah. So here's what it is, okay? So shareholder activism is when an investor invests in a publicly traded company and they are not happy with the investment, or they're opportunistic, meaning that they would see a company underperforming, they would buy the stock because it's underperforming, and then they would get rid of management and the board and put their own team in place. So I anticipated that was going to happen in Canada, and because it was going on in the States. But my bosses at the time felt, this will never happen here. It's too collegial. We're not going to have people going after people in a hostile way in this country, so there's no business there. And I really was convinced that it was coming. And I said, because their business was set up to just talk to retail investors and other moms and pops, get them to vote proxy, that's it. I felt the business model could be a lot more sophisticated, and they didn't. And so I wanted to build that, and I left really. It took me, I had to go home and convince my wife that I'm going to quit my job to do this, and we had kids and we had mortgage. But I convinced her with a business plan that I'm going to do this. And of
What
course,
year is this, sir?
this was 2003. That's when Kingsdale, by the way, if you do the math,
You're 33 at the time.
Yes, 33 at the time. And 20 years, June is going to 20 years since I started that firm. So 20 years since I made that decision. And so,
Were you nervous?
well, if you call this nervous.
Were you nervous?
Yeah, Christine was, but the thing about it is that, we had a lot to lose, right? Because we had young kids, 3 under 3. We had a mortgage, and we had, I was a vice president, so I was making a decent living. And so all that would have been lost. But as a family, Christine and I sat down and go, what is it that we wanted? We wanted flexibility. Because at the time, my schedule was not my own. My boss would tell me when I should travel and all that. And I go, no, I didn't want that anymore. I wanted to be able to control my destiny. It wasn't about making a lot of money and getting rich, but I saw this opportunity that I wish they would exploit, and me being an employee, but because they refused to exploit it, I felt so passionate about the potential that I decided I was going to put everything on the line. So I went into all the banks and all the investors that I know, because I knew a lot of people. Not a single person would back my business plan. Like, the bank said no, everybody said no. But I went into a bank, CIBC, even though they said no, and I went, and it was at the time when CIBC had all those, desks and stuff in Commerce Court on the ground level. And I saw in the sea of people like this, one black man behind the desk. One black guy. And I went to him, his name is Lancelot Day, and I said, Lance, bro, because when you want something from another black man, you gotta, if a black police pull you over, bro, what's going on, man? It's always bro, and you know that you need something when somebody call you bro, right? And so I said, bro, listen, man, could you look at this business plan for me? He looked at it, and he looked at me and said, this is an amazing plan, amazing. And it was a time when these guys were flexible and they could appeal on your behalf internally. He said, get back to me in a week. He came back in a week and said, I'll loan you $100,000 to start your company. Wow. And I ordered $100,000 mortgage. I put it against the house. Told obviously have to get Christine to sign off on it. And then I started employee number 1 to set this business up. And again, 20 years. There's now 5 or 6 firms again in the space, and we're still the number 1 firm in Canada with 80% market share in this country still 20 years later.
Talk about your first big client. because it's a great story, how it came about and how it launched you.
Yeah, so there's a few deals that we've done over the years, and the reason why I have this great relationship with Paul Stein that you mentioned was because we were working on, when I just started the firm, there's this fellow, this client, when I was at Georgeson, that was doing a merger. Goldcorp, Wheat River Minerals is what the name of the company at the time. And I'm this upstart guy, right? And I'm scrappy, but the firm I left was the big firm. They were like their market, they were making like $300 million a year in revenue, head office in Wall Street, so I couldn't compete with those guys. So I put out a proposal to Wheat River, Ian Telfer, and they go, this deal is too important. His guy said this deal is too important, I can't hire this upstart guy to do it. We're gonna go to your old firm. But before I left Georgeson, I helped them with their stock option plan, and I got shareholder approval on it. And it was tight, 50.1% in favor. And he just, the chairman was amazing. He was like, I love this guy, And I left. So now when they said no, I go, what do I do now? Because this was a big deal and it would have been great for my firm. I called Paul Stein up. And I said, Paul, listen, man, I need your help. And Paul called Ian Telfer. And so you remember that guy that helped us with the option plan? Yes. He set up his own firm. The firm that he was working with is trying to put him out of the market. We should give him this deal. And I got that deal. And it completely changed my life and changed the firm. Yeah.
When was the inflection point where you saw that activism in Canada went from being mostly in the United States to becoming a significant activity in Canada? What was the inflection point?
I think there's a lot of US guys that start to look at the Canadian market a little bit closely. And we coined the term, it's the land of milk and honey over here for activism. Because nobody wanted to do it here in Canada, and the US market became so saturated that they had to look at other markets. And of course, the closest market to them was here. But there's a lot of complexity in our regulation. For example, in the US, they have one regulator, the SEC. In Canada, they have multiple regulators. In Canada as well, every single province have their own law on how to deal with this issue and activism. And so it kind of made them scared a little bit as to how to be successful in this market. And once they start to get the advice from people like myself and others like Waleed start practicing, Solomon start practicing in that area, it starts to give them a lot more comfort that they can be successful in Canada in spite of the regulatory barriers that they have to go through. And so a couple of them would come up, they'd be successful, others would come up, and then all of a sudden, they just exploded, literally. Well, what started it was the hostile takeovers in the mining space. And then people saw, wait a minute, hostile takeovers were common in Canada, companies are doing it, they're successful, maybe activism will work as well. And then activism started and it just never stopped. But Ian, how many activists follow working on it right now?
17.
17. Right.
When was the inflection point where you became the go-to firm? Obviously, when we became your partner, you were already there and you had great momentum.
Yeah.
When did that start?
I think it started, I think in 2000, so in 2004 was when the merger with Wheat River started. And then that lasted us for a year because of different levels of takeovers that happened. That deal, there's hostiles happening left, right, and center. And that lasted 2004, 2005. 2006 was the mining space went on fire, and Falconbridge and Inco was in play. Xstrata made a hostile bid for Falconbridge. I got hired to work for Xstrata in that deal. And then Vale made a hostile bid for Inco. I got hired to work on Inco. The Falconbridge deal was a $19 billion deal, and my little firm was working on it. And then Inco was 21 billion. We got to work on that deal. And then we won, both of them. The management team had no shares. The activist, which was a former CEO of the company, had all the support from the major shareholders. And I was able to get one of their largest shareholders to switch, just before the meeting starts. And they couldn't believe what happened. And they won the vote, and then that just got out there, and then it just exploded after that. That's where the go-to firm.
2005, you're 35 years of age.
Were you part of the Bay Street establishment? Were you an outsider? What did you feel like? How did you operate?
Well-
You went into the boardrooms of
Yeah.
the biggest corporations in Canada. What was that like?
Yeah, I think, of course I was always black, right? I never, I never changed since I came here. And, so, yeah, but from the day I pushed the mail cart, right? I got a suit. And, and then you start to dress like the Bay Street guys, pinstripe and all that kind of stuff, because you need to be accepted. After a while, you start to put on the Christian Louboutin and you walk in the room and everybody expects you to walk in there looking like that. But you have to earn that. So over time, people used to, because you also have to appreciate the fact that I was working with companies right across the country. And we're doing conference calls, not video calls where you can see people. So I was kind of, when people meet me for the first time, they would say, "You're the voice." They would call me the voice, because it was just my voice that was giving them advice all this time. And but in a lot of cases, they didn't expect me to be black. They didn't expect that when I walk in to meet them for the first time, it's a black guy. And, I was called the voice. But one of the things, because there's a lot of times I walk into a boardroom and you see the skepticism, because I came highly recommended, and then I walk in and they did not expect to see me. And then I started to give the advice, and then people go, okay, this guy seems like he knows what he's doing. And they became ally, and they started to help me. So, and over time, it doesn't matter what I look like. Are you gonna win this proxy fight for me? Are you the best at what you do? And you also have to appreciate, I came from Georgeson, who now realize that they now have to change their business model to compete with me, because they're losing deals after deals after deals, big deals, to me, this upstart. And so they changed their business model to come after me, but they couldn't keep up because they had such an advantage in like less than 3 years that they just couldn't compete. And it was like 2008 through 2009, they decided to close their Canadian office and shut it down and stay in the US.
But don't you think one of your advantages was you were Kingsdale and Kingsdale was Westfall? That it was your firm, your grit, your determination, your reputation was on the line, and they knew that they could invest and back that?
Yeah, but I also was a scrapper, because I scrapped all my life. I was in that tin shack in rural Jamaica. I scrapped to, when my mom kicked me out at 13, I lived on my own from 13 to 16, I was scrapping to get along there. I came to Canada, lived with my dad for 2 years, and then I started scrapping again after that. I was scrapping the whole time, and I always say to my clients, if you have a choice between hiring someone with that background to work for you, or hire someone who lived in the Forest Hill or Rosedale, went to Upper Canada College, no offense to Upper Canada College, went to UC, went to Harvard, and they're now, who would you choose to scrap? Because a proxy fight is a scrap, right? You want the guy who's gone through all those things. And so that's what I brought to every single proxy fight, that, even if it's unwinnable, I'm gonna find a way to win. And I'm gonna find a way to advise you on the right outcome that you're gonna want. And so I became known as that person. And there are times when you have to encourage your clients to settle, but you wanna make sure that you get the best settlement possible. And I remember one proxy fight I was working on, the company launched a takeover bid, it was a friendly deal, and next day the stock went down 40%. That's a bad sign when you launch a friendly deal and your stock take a 40% hit the next day. Shareholders start getting upset, and somebody said, we want to replace the board, they're incompetent. And it was tough. And then finally I went to the CEO, and he had this big palatial office, and I went in and I said to him, let's say his name is, to protect the innocent, his name is Jack. And I walked into his office, and it was a very big, it's like this room. And I said, you know what, Jack, we're gonna lose this proxy fight. And it's either you go into the boardroom now and you cut a deal with the guys who are friends with you now, or you deal with the enemies after they take control. Because the way that it happens when you lose a proxy fight, they go after the board first, and then they deal with the CEO after, because the board has the right to hire and fire the CEO, not a shareholder. But you have to get rid of the board to get that right and put your own board in place. So I told him that you need to go into friendly, and it was quoted in the paper, you need to go deal with friends now or enemies later. Because these guys will not give you your stock options, they will not give you a good severance, they're gonna sue you until you have nothing. But if you go into the boardroom and cut a deal and resign as CEO and take a great package, that's gonna be better off for you. And the next board meeting, he did that and walked away with a ton of money.
So you did a fantastic job building Kingsdale. Today you have 100 people.
Yeah, close to, yeah.
And what were the key attributes of the culture you created? Because you created a wonderful culture that enabled you to build this firm, not dependent upon your own style or ability, and institutionalize it. What were the key attributes?
Well, it's funny you mention that because my colleague that, my now CEO Ian Robertson and I, and a colleague was talking about that today about, you know, I drafted the contract and engagement for the clients. And one of the language in there, paragraph in there is that we're available 365 days, you know, a year, 7 days a week. And you can call us anytime. And that was central to what I was doing. And I was saying to my colleague, we still have that language in the contract. And given, you know, how society is today about work-life balance and so on, that language is creating challenges for the younger generation because they're like, I'm not available 24/7, 365 days a year. I want to be able to shut down at a certain time, but when you're in this business and people rely on you, it's impossible to shut down. So we constantly have to work on that, the culture of saying, yes, we're available, but there's a time when we have to go, we can't take this phone call, but I don't have that off switch. I don't have that pause. I've never had it. I still don't. And so but I tell my colleague that we have to balance that culture with the new people coming into the organization because they don't want that. And if we want to maintain people, we have to find a way to adjust the way we approach work. Not the same way I approach work, but that culture was ingrained in us. That people were, I remember I was working with, I'll say his name, you know, not because he's not around, but God bless him, Eugene Melnick. I was working on a proxy fight with Eugene Melnick, and
This is BioVale?
BioVale.
Yeah.
And it was a tough life. And 1 o'clock in the morning, Eugene sent me an email on something, and 1:05 he sent me an email back saying, aren't you going to respond to my email? Okay? And so, and that was the attitude. And there was a Sunday, we were working on a file on a Saturday, and he said, okay, we need to have a big meeting all day Saturday. And then the next day, you gotta come downtown on Sunday to have another all-day meeting on Sunday. That was the expectation, was that we're gonna be available 24/7. And I had that written in the contract. And so that was the culture that we built. And clients knew this. They knew that we're available. They knew that we're gonna put everything on the line to work for them. And they wanted somebody on their team to be that person, especially when everything matters.
So you reference in your book that you've enjoyed great success through hiring and recruiting and retaining great people, but you went through a period that you referenced in the book where you had some people leave, and that was a trauma for you. Talk about that and what you learned from it.
Yeah, 50% of my workforce left because we have in our business proxy season, right? So anywhere from January to June is like, we make like 80% for revenue in that period of time. So it's really, really tough, right? You push your people really, really hard. And because it's a niche industry, it's not like you can just go and hire 10 people to fill the load. You got to train them, so you can't do that. So, you know, we were working so hard, we're so busy, and one person after the other would walk into my office, I resign. And that was it. And we go, okay, look at all these files that we have. And as Christine knows, there's, once I was at the office for like 36 hours straight, just pounding it out. And, go to the gym and shower, and, she would do things with the kids. But I couldn't disappoint the clients. And so I had to take on so much more, and then I had to go, okay, fine. I now have to start to change the type of people that we hire, right? Because there's a pressure cooker period of time that we have to hire people who can go through that period of time knowing that the rest of the year is not going to be like that. But when you're going through that period, people don't see a way out. They don't see the light at the end of the tunnel. All they see is just a mountain of work and no end to it. So we have to hire people who are used to working like steady. So we started to go to investment bankers who didn't want to work at the banks anymore. We had to go to lawyers who didn't want to be lawyers anymore and bring them in the organization because they're used to working at that pace. And that kind of changed things for us.
So you had this desire to expand to the United States. As my father-in-law at the time said to me, when we went to the US, if you go to America on a vacation, you're lucky to come back with your wallet, let alone trying to do business there are so many Canadian, high-profile stories of demise. You went to the United States, talk about your experience, you were successful there, but you redirected your activities over a period of time. What was the key? When did you decide to go to the States? What was the key for your success?
Well, I think, as you may recall, with you, doing that partnership deal with you was critical because we wanted to be a global brand, because we realized that, we're good in Canada, but we had something that in the US, they commoditized. And we felt that I could add value, to that, but it's a very different market. So, but when we went in there, recruitment was key. And it's still tough to recruit in that market. And because it's expensive, we wanted to open in Wall Street. It's expensive. Everything is expensive. Rent is expensive. Recruitment is expensive. So I had to get around that, because I was comparing what I was paying people here for that talent versus the talent I was getting there, and it was subpar talent, but way more money. And so it's a challenging market for recruitment, but it's also a challenging market to convince people that, hey, I'm a Canadian guy, and I'm better than you guys in the United States. And so ultimately we're able to do that. We still have our office in New York, but it's certainly not the same profile that we built here in Canada. But it's a successful brand. Our biggest client in the US is McDonald's.
Wow. Talk about, we had the privilege of acquiring 60% of your business. We were partners with you. You then bought your business back after I left. Well, two things. You never asked me why I wanted to be your partner.
No, I actually I did. You said you wanted to look like me. You wanted to.
That's true.
Yeah, and I go, okay, I'll try to figure that out. So I think what impressed me was just your style and your approach and what you built. Like you started by scrapping, and there was a time in your career where people didn't believe in you, people didn't want to fund you, and then but in spite of that, you were able to kind of make it happen. So I just wanted somebody like that in my corner to partner with.
So let me tell you what I saw in you. I thought we were brothers from another mother. I thought we had all the same attributes of persistence and determination, as Will Rogers said, that you would do everything in your power to succeed or die trying. As they asked Elon Musk, was failure ever an option? He said never. Either I'd have to be incapacitated or dead. I would never give up. And I obviously believed in the business model and what you were building, and I could see the trend that you identified. But it was really an investment in you, and I sort of saw that in probably the first hour that we spent together. And I learned a lot from you as well, not just about business things, but about character. Talk about, you now built a family office.
Mm-hmm.
You are not the CEO of Kingsdale. I met somebody who runs your family office for you. You have other activities. Talk about those other activities.
So over time, obviously we did a deal together, and my deal was I'm going to work with the firm for a while, and ultimately to transition the management team over, and then move on and do other things. And when you left NBC, I just didn't feel that the folks there shared my vision and what I wanted to do, and I really had no interest in partnering with them anymore. So I found a way to buy the company back so that I can focus on, building a portfolio of assets, and Kingsdale would be one of those assets, and then bring a management team in place to actually run that. But I also saw that there was a lot of people that had my determination that weren't getting financial support, because of different reasons. It could be systemic racism or otherwise. And I felt that I have the financial capacity to help some of those businesses. And so I decided to start acquiring companies and investing behind entrepreneurs. That exactly what you said. A lot of people, you could have the best business idea, but if you're the wrong person to run it, it doesn't matter how great that idea is, it will never amount to anything. And that's what I learned about activism. The reason why activists invest and do these things, it's because of the management discount that's associated with a poorly managed business. Like CP Rail was one of those, right? And people couldn't appreciate how massive the management discount was. Massive. And so when the activists would come in and they would get rid of the overhang, which is essentially the inept management, put proper management in place, you see massive value creation that happens. But CP Rail as a business was a great business, right? When you think about it, they have 2 railroads in the country. They're not making any more. They're captive audience, captive customers, that they essentially can charge whatever they want. One was performing, lights out, 60% operating ratio. The lower the ratio, the better the company's performing and the more the stock prices were performing. CP Rail was in the 80s. They were massively underperforming, but yet the shareholders accepted the excuse from management that it's not us. Bill Ackman didn't accept that. He replaced them all. And then within 2 years, he made $1.8 billion because the stock went from $60 to $300 in that period of time. So there's a massive management discount that you can get. And so those opportunities also exist in the private market. So I was able to take advantage of some of those opportunities in the private market. But then I also know that if I look at you and I see something special in you and you have a great business idea, I'm going to back you. And I'm going to give you the fuel that you need, which is generally capital and support. And then I'm going to just help you to grow to your full potential. That's what you did in my case, and that's what I do to others when I see, especially business people that look like me that have great ideas, but they can't be funded because of some prejudice that somebody has about their potential to succeed. The reason why nobody funded me when I started Kingsdale was because of the fact that they go, okay, your business model is this. Hey, you gotta think about it. I'm pitching you, you're a bank. And I walk in and I pitch you and I said, I'm gonna go into the boardrooms in corporate Canada and I'm gonna teach them and I'm gonna show them how to deal with activists, investors. Well, who activists who? Who are those? What do they do? And I have to explain what an activist does to this banker. All right, and the banker will go, okay, fine, tell me about the boardrooms in corporate Canada. Well, there are old white men that's in there. Okay, fine, and you're a 34, 33-year-old black guy, and you're gonna go in there and convince them to hire you to help them to do something that's not here yet? And they couldn't buy it, they couldn't get it, they couldn't wrap their head around it, because they saw all the challenges that I was gonna face with my business model. When I brought it to Lancelot Days, that black man, he didn't see the challenges, he saw the opportunity. And as a result of that, he was able to go to the bank, convince them to loan me the money to start that business.
Besides your remarkable financial success and business success, you've really been a thought leader and a role model.
Turn this me, turn up.
Mike Dickens. But I think people know you even more in Canada now for your fantastic philanthropic initiatives as a family, in your leadership, in your True North initiative. Talk about what was the impetus for that. You've had fantastic success. What was the strategy behind it? What were you trying to accomplish? And talk about where you are right now.
Yeah, so when George Floyd was murdered, I was at home because everybody was under lockdown and people were working virtually. And I saw, somebody sent me a text and said, have you seen the video? And I said, yes, I've seen it, because at the time I thought it was the Ahmaud Arbery video where he was jogging through the neighborhood and he got killed by just 2 citizens because he shouldn't be there in their view. And I said, yes, I saw that. And they said, no, there's one that's more egregious than that. And they sent me the George Floyd video. And I was in my home office and I watched it. And I stood up and looked in the mirror and I immediately saw George Floyd looking back at me. It was just, that's what I felt, that's what I saw. Because it was so egregious to me that I just couldn't believe that this was happening. And then I started to think back. Like I had, because it was in circulation for a while before I saw it. I had a series of board meetings that week. I had a CITCAS board meeting, I had a TIP board meeting, I had all these board meetings, and not a single person in the board meetings that I had said anything to me about that situation, you know? And if you think about it, if you're in a particular ethnic group, and something like that happened to someone in your ethnic group, and you go to work the next day, and not a single colleague said, I'm sorry for what happened to those people in your ethnic group, or that person. You would feel that those people are callous. I know they're not responsible, but they didn't even acknowledge the fact that this is happening to someone in your community. When Russia invaded Ukraine, and you have a Ukrainian colleague, do you just ignore that when you go to work the next day? You say something consoling to them, because they may have families, they may have a feeling of that. And when I realized later on, there's an expression for that. It's called linked fate. I saw my fate linked to George Floyd's, and that's why I was so profoundly affected. And I didn't really know what to do about it. And I sat down, and I'm working. Called my colleague Ian Robinson. Ian is here, and said, "Listen, we got to write something. We got to do something about this." And I started to write this, my feeling about what I was going through as a black person on Bay Street, and in corporate Canada, and in the neighborhood that I lived in. And I stated in the article, me jogging through the neighborhood, and a white woman fell in front of me, and I hesitated to help her because I didn't have any identification with me. And I'm the only black man in the neighborhood. And then she made me disoriented, and I go to help her, and then she started fighting me off, and then my neighbors call the cops are white. What's gonna happen to me? How am I gonna explain in that situation that I'm trying to help? So I hesitated, and I asked the question, how many people in my position, as successful as I am, as known as I am on Bay Street, would hesitate to do something good for somebody else? And I say, we have a problem in our society, and we need to do something about it. And so when the article was published, I started getting calls from, again, I was in all the boardrooms in corporate Canada. So I started getting calls from these CEOs and board members, what can I do to help, what can I do to help? The first call I got was from Victor Dodig. Victor is the CEO of CIBC. They said, Wes, we're friends, and I read the article, I need to help, how can I help? And then I got an email from Prem Watsa. Prem lives in the neighborhood, and Prem said, hey Wes, I want to come over to see you. Came over, social distance in the backyard, and he said, I came from India over 30 years ago, built this amazing, successful company, and I know black people are treated differently in this country, but until I read that piece from you, I didn't get it. What can I do to help? Calls like that all day. And then at the end of the day, I said, listen, I got an idea for you all. Let's form an organization to do something about it. Let's not use politicians to solve the problems, to come up with laws and so on. Let's do our part as business leaders. Let's form this organization called the Canadian Council of Business Leaders Against Anti-Black Systemic Racism. And let's sign a pledge. And I'm going to design the pledge. And let's sign a pledge to say we're going to make sure that at the very top of our company, that there's no systemic racism exists, meaning that there's no barriers in place to prevent people from getting ahead because of their color. So, and if we look around the boardroom table and there are no black people there, ask yourself, why is that? Is there a systemic reason for it? And if and then while you're doing that, fix the systemic problem. Go into your C-suite, ask the same question, address that. Pipeline, same thing. And you're gonna sign a pledge that you're gonna do that. And because as the CEO, you have the power to determine who comes in and who leaves your organization. So let's start there. And so I was able to go around,
Is this 3 years ago?
This was 2.5 years ago.
Okay.
So I went to, so I said to, so all the people called me back, I said, okay, I need to have 3 leaders or 4 leaders that has different type of sectors that they're in, and to try to convince them
to sign this pledge, a 7-point pledge. So I went to Victor and said, Victor, I want you to be a co-chair on this thing here with me. He's a bank, it's the most conservative institution in the country. So if I can get a bank to sign it, anybody should be able to sign it. Then I went to Rhoda Dagger, who was at Cisco Systems at the time, and she was head of a multinational company here. So I said, if a multinational can sign this pledge, anyone should be able to sign it that's multinational. So Google, Twitter, all those multinational operating Canada should be able to sign it. And I went to an entrepreneur panel. I said, if we can get an entrepreneur to sign it, like Loblaw should be able to sign it, all these other companies, Rogers, you name it, should be able to sign it. And so that's what I did. And we negotiated, showed them the document that I wanted, drafted, we negotiated it, and had them agree to it. And then we made the document public and asked others to do it. So Victor was able to call all the CEOs of banks and say, I want you to sign this. Rhoda called all the multinationals and say, I want you to sign this. Prem called all the entrepreneurs of note, and I used my network to start calling people, and then we just got people to sign after sign, and then we got, for the launch, we had over 300 people that signed it.
And how many employees are represented by all of the people that have signed your pledge?
Sobeys alone has 130,000 people, okay? And, but the companies represent $1.3 trillion in value that have signed the pledge.
And you feel like you are obviously very proud. Are you feeling that the momentum is continuing and accelerating?
Absolutely. Every day. We have housing, and it's not just about putting black people on boards, by the way. It's allowing, creating opportunities for people like I used to be, where I was, education. Single mothers are now getting mortgages and homes because we now have a partnership with Habitat, with banks, and with builders to get them into homes. We just approved about 200 families. So it's not just that, it's about grassroots all the way up. Today, for example, BMO hired their first CEO to head their US bank, the Black Bank. And I remember when I was dealing with him, when I was signing the pledge, he was telling me all the struggles they were having in their institution. Now he's the CEO of the US. Right, so those are things that we're seeing changes every single day. And listen, at the end of the day, how is Canada worse off by letting me fulfill my true potential? How is it worse off? How is it better to say, you know what, a guy like Wes should stay in Malvern and do whatever they do in Malvern? It's not helpful when our society goes, we're going to pick and choose who the winners are. We should allow everyone to participate, irrespective of what they look like. And we're going to have a better society because those people can bring their true selves to work. They don't have to worry about, I can't wear my braids because if I wear my braids, this is going to happen. I can't wear my whatever color suit this is because people are going to think I'm too flashy. And that's what happens. We put restrictions and people being themselves and they hold themselves back, and as a result of that, we hold our society back in the process. Diversity helps us. And if I think about Kingsdale, when I started Kingsdale, a lot of people would bring somebody into the organization. And let's say Kingsdale, this didn't happen, but let's say with Kingsdale. I started, I'm a one-man, black dude, okay? And then I'm looking for employee number 2. And employee number 2, I send out the post-ins, and I shortlisted them to 3 people. The first person walk in is a Jamaican guy. And then all of a sudden we started talking about rice and peas and jerk chicken. Who cares about the resume anymore? Because they were qualified, that's why they were shortlisted. I hired him, forget about the other 2, because we have something in common. And then we go, okay, we need our 3rd employee. And we sent it out, shortlisted 3, then all of a sudden, a Jamaican woman came through the door. Talk about the same thing, rice and peas and jerk chicken, and 3 Jamaicans in the place, right? We're at the boardroom at a table now, and we're looking around and going, man, 3 Jamaicans, we look a little bad, people are gonna start talking. Is it just only Jamaicans that you hire? Let's go find a middle-aged white guy. Okay? So we go in and we find a middle-aged white guy, he shows up, lunchtime comes, take out my jerk chicken, rice and peas, my friend took out oxtail, that person take out some fried chicken and rice, and this middle-aged white dude take out peanut butter and jelly sandwich. And we start laughing at him, just like you're laughing now. How long is he gonna last? I created a toxic work environment for him. And doesn't matter how good he is, it's not gonna stay. Because every lunch hour, he's gonna get made fun of. He's not gonna be his true self. And he's not gonna bring his true self to work. So when we hear people say, we hired this person of color and they didn't work out, it's because of the fact that we didn't create a culture in our organization for them to be themselves. And when they leave, we try, and we move on. So what I say to these companies is that you have to create a culture in your business where people can bring themselves to work. And if they bring themselves to work, you're gonna get 110% of what you hire versus 10 or 15%. And the other thing I say to people is that never buy into the tokenism argument. Okay, I'm gonna bring a black guy on my board. Because you know what, if you bring a black guy on your board, you're gonna get 10% of his capabilities. Because he's not gonna be coming in and trying to, because if you go in and start to be like, I'm gonna show them how bright I am, people are not gonna like you. And then people are gonna go, okay, is he deserving? So you have this tightrope that you walk in. You don't wanna outshine people, but you don't wanna appear to be underperforming as well. And then as a result of that tightrope you're walking, you can't be yourself. Well, let's say you bring a second person in, or a third. Then all of a sudden, there's a collective there. And you can now be yourself and you can contribute fully because nobody's looking at you as the person to, hey, there's a black question. Jimmy, why don't you answer that?
You've started to, spread your wings and fly. You're on TV, you're on a lot of boards, etc. Talk about what motivated you to do that, satisfaction you derive from it, and how that is setting a role model example for your children, but also for everybody else in the world who said, gosh, I want to be West Hall when I grow up.
Yeah, and the TV part was interesting because they called me up and said, hey, first of all, I got a text from a DM on Twitter from someone saying, hey, you want to be a dragon? It's like, of course I didn't respond to that because who does that on Twitter? And then a few weeks later, I actually got an email from the producers of the show saying, we would like to talk to you about Dragon's Den. And I said, sure, let's talk. And they said, hey, we want you to audition for the show. And I said, I've never been on TV before. I know nothing about television. And they said, well, I think you're okay. You should do it. And everything that I do that's potentially could create embarrassment or anything to my family, I always talk to my family first, talk to my wife about it, and make sure that everybody's okay. So they said, you got to audition. There's 12 people that auditioned at the time. And then after the audition, they called me back, and it was all virtual, and they said, we want you to be on the show. I accepted it because of what it represented to those kids coming up. They've never had a black person on the show ever, as a dragon. And I felt that if I can do a good job, because ultimately it's ratings, right? So even if I'm black and I'm terrible, they're gonna go, dude, we need another black guy, not you. But I knew what it represented to people watching the show, that it would mean a huge difference to those young kids and entrepreneurs to go, well, there's success stories that are real, and I can be that. And especially when they see the background. A lot of people see the finished product, but now they get to see the background, how it started, and they can now associate with that kind of background and realize that what I've accomplished is difficult, but it's not impossible.
And did you enjoy the experience?
Well, I'm filming again in May. So we're at CBC decided that they wanted, instead of 10 episodes, they're gonna do 16 for the first time in like 15 years. So that meant that there was some success. It's a lot of work, but it's a lot of fun at the same time.
You have a remarkable family. You have 5 children.
Yes, sir.
They grew up a little differently than you.
Yeah.
You grew up with a tin shack,
Yeah.
barely making ends meet. You said you had no shoes.
No shoes.
Your children live in Rosedale,
Yep.
in what people would call a mansion.
Some people.
Some people. They have grown to enjoy a remarkable standard of living, and fantastic enjoyment of the fruits of your labor, but they're remarkably kind, thoughtful, humble, and on their way to being very accomplished individually. Talk about what you and Christina have done, because necessity was the mother of invention for you. But you've been able to combine the beautiful standard of living with all the value system that was instilled in you, but you and Christina instilled in your children. How'd you do that?
First of all, not all of them are very humble. This little guy here was, we're at our hotel in St. Lucia, and he was like, how old were you? He was like about 10. And there was a sign that, you can't go in a hot tub unless you're 14 years old or over. So he walked in and this kid is like, don't you see the sign? Get out of the hot tub. And he's like, I own the hotel. But no, I think, first of all, Christine and I are both Jehovah's Witnesses, and Christine was born in the faith. So that's helped. And I became one in 1991. So we raised our kids with humility, because if anyone knows anything about the Jehovah's Witness faith, is that you got to knock on people's door on Saturday mornings, and people don't like you knocking on their doors on Saturday morning, right? And they tend to kind of get a little upset, and you got to be humble when they do that. Then you got to move on to the next one. And so our kids were raised with that attitude, but they're also, because of the fact that what I saw in my grandmother. They were raised privileged, but they're not raised to be privileged. And because they had no choice, they inherited the comforts that they have. And so, but we can raise them not to take that for granted and to use it in a way that's negative. And so we've always been like that. I remember when the kids were younger and we always give them one item and they share it. And they take turns, whether it be a Game Boy or Nintendo. It's one. It's not like each of you guys get your own, and then you got to figure out how to share it. And so we've always done that, and even to this day, you got to earn your own money, and you got to work. So we never just kind of, here's $1, go buy your new car and pat them on the back. We're not that type of parents. But that said, we want them to be, we want them to think about what it's like to give back as well. Right? That it's got to be a part of your DNA when you see something wrong to do something about it, and that's how we raise them, and we continue to raise them like that. And just don't take our wealth for granted. Don't take my success for granted. My success is mine; it's not yours. You got to earn yours. And once you get to a certain point, my eldest 27-year-old moved out, and we went to his apartment. His very humble apartment, because it's all he can afford. And I felt bad for him, because I look at this apartment and go, you know what, it's better than my first apartment, But then because I felt bad that he was moving out and he's gonna get this small apartment, and I look at it, I'm like, it's not too bad after. A little bit of paint, a little bit of mopping and dusting, he'll be okay. But that's what he could afford. And he didn't go in and say, I'm gonna live at the Ritz because my dad is this guy. He goes, I'm gonna go to something within my budget. And that's what he did, and so that's how we train.
In the Jewish faith, they say, may you live for 120 years. On that basis, you have 67 years left. When they bury you, and what would you like your legacy to be? How would you like to be known?
Somebody who actually did something to change society for the better. And that's it. And it doesn't have to be written in history books or anything. The people who were changed know it, and in their hearts they go, thank you. And that's it. They don't have to write me notes. They don't have to put up monuments. The people who were affected just, thank you. Because that's what my grandmother got. My grandmother died in poverty. And my grandmother didn't want me, when I came to Canada, to spend my life working to support her. She would tell me, you're there to be educated, to change your life, not my life. And she never resented, her plight in life. And she never resented having us at that age, when she should be getting into retirement. She's now looking after all these grandkids. And she died raising great grandkids. She died at 97 years old, poverty her entire life, and she never resented it. So I want to leave that kind of legacy behind, whereby I was viewed as selfless, and I changed certain lives for the better, and those people know it and appreciate it. And they'll remember it for the rest of their life, just like I'm going to remember my grandmother for the rest of my life.
You've gone a little bit longer than I anticipated, but I would like to leave the opportunity for a little bit of time for anyone who has a question of Wes. Anybody would like to ask a question? Don't be shy.
The Leafs are going to lose anyway, so no place to rush to. Okay, it's got to be 8-1 tonight. Sorry.
Anybody have a question? Go ahead.
Barry. Barry.
Wes, what would your grandmother say to you now, you think?
Well, she was always proud of me. She was. Oh, even when I had, because I had nothing when she died, by the way. And I should probably tell you, I wouldn't say I have nothing. I didn't have as much. So my grandmother, so when I got my first break at the company, Georgeson, the company said I want to be vice president of, and they said, the guy called me and hired me. 2 weeks after getting that big break, she died. So she never, ever saw it. But she was always proud and she thought I was going places. But all the grandkids, she thought the same way of them. But for some reason, I felt that she had something special with me, you know? I don't know what it was, but I just felt that way. And she always had I had a special place in her heart, and she had a special place in mine until this day. So, yeah, she was just an incredible person. I think about her all the time, and it informs the way that I live my life and think about other people as well.
Please.
And Barry?
Miles, in your tradition, there's a concept of repairing the world. I work with young people in a university, and for me, some of them saw what went on in the business world in the 80s and 90s, which is about self and everything else. Here tonight, we hear Eric West, and I know you too, have a sense, I think, of responsibility, having been successful that isn't just about yourself, but in trying to repair the world around you. I think it's really important for young people to see that example in you. And how do you further that mission?
I agree with you. And he is a remarkable role model. Last question. There's a lady in the back, sorry.
3 advice you would give to a 33-year-old self.
Well, keep
The
in mind.
question was the advice you would give to the 33-year-old version of yourself.
Yeah, so
3 advice.
3, yeah,
Oh.
3 advice.
3.
3.
Oh, 3.
Yeah,
Sorry.
I don't know if I have 3, but I can tell you I started Kingsdale at that age, right? So I was actually 34 when I started. And so if I look at my 34-year-old self, I took chances, and I would say take chances. And the reason why I took those chances was because of the fact that I felt I could recover. So, take chances, knowing that you have the longevity to recover, and also try to make some mistakes, because that's how you learn and you expedite your learning. So when I started Kingsdale, I knew I had to take massive risk, and that's what I did. But I knew that, okay, fine, if it didn't work out, Christine and I talked about it. I said, if it doesn't work out, what's the worst case scenario? She's going to go back to work, and I'm going to go back to work. Worst case scenario. A lot of people, when they take risk, they look at worst case scenario first, but I look at the best case scenario first, and I spend more weighting on it. Because if you have a chart, worst case scenario on this side, best case scenario on this side, what part is going to have the most items? Worst case scenario. Because the best case scenario is one item. I'm successful. That's it. That's one. But then this is going to happen. Then I'm going to lose my house. And then I'm going to lose my family. Then my neighbor's going to think I'm a failure. All these things on the worst case scenario side of it. But the other side is you're going to be successful. And a lot of people don't pay attention to that. So I would say take some risk. Know that you have the time to, you're going to recover. And make some mistakes because you're going to learn from them.
So I will tell you, I've had the good fortune and privilege of doing this thing. I've had prime ministers, I've had politicians, I've had philanthropists, I've had entrepreneurs, I've had scientists, I've had many people. But I will tell you that I've never had a more enjoyable, informative, inspiring, intriguing and motivating conversation with anyone than you. And I'm thinking to myself, it's not about your color, it's about your character, your kindness, your grit, and your just amazing determination to make the world a better place. As the great quote from, I won't remember a second, but the quote is, at 65 you get these seniors moments, so I apologize. 100 years from now, no one will ever remember the car you drove, the house you lived in, or for that matter, how much money you had in your bank account, but the world may be a different place if you made a difference in the life of a young person. You and Christine and your family have certainly done that. I will tell you, I'm an old white guy, but you've made a huge difference in my life, and I'm very privileged by our friendship, and I've learned a lot tonight. I've learned a lot over the last 10 years of our friendship, and you're a great role model and inspiration to all of us here. And so on behalf of all of us, thank you very much for being who you are. Thank you very much for what your family does, and thanks for sharing your insights and thoughts with us. We're all a lot better off as a result of it, so thank you. Thank you.